Hey everybody, and welcome back to another book review. As you all know, it's the middle of Black History Month, and so, as always, I'm trying to, at least get one book in that falls into the group representation for the month. So this book falls right in line with that, and that is a book that I was not expecting to like. And it's called Black AF History by Michael Harriot. And so this book was recommended to me, and I've been trying not to, like, every time a book gets recommended to me, like, I try to, just add it to the list and call it a day. But this one, I immediately, like, my assistant principal at school, he came up to me and he goes, hey, you need to like read this book, listen to this book, do something with the book. And I was like, okay. And he's like, no, like now, like I need to talk to you about it. And I'm like, okay. So I started audiobooking it on the way home, and then I was like, bruh, it's not at all what you expect. It's very it's I give it a 5 out of 5. Okay, because it's nothing that I haven't heard before. In terms of like, this is information that like I know. So the whole book is written kind of like a history textbook, just lots of information, but it's mixed in with a bunch of anecdotes from his family upbringing, from his life, and then also just stories that like people in his family have told throughout the time that he was a kid, but then also interspersed with bits and pieces of stories that you may have heard whisperings of, but that are like actually true stories for American history, and it has really nothing to do with the typical people that you always hear about. For most of us growing up in this specialized country that we call the US of A, when we learned history, depending on what grade you started, also what state you live in, because some states do theirs a little differently. But I know for me, it was like, you start with the colonial period, and you got 13 colonies, and then the Revolutionary War, and then a bunch of stuff happens in between the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, but like nobody actually remembers what happens. And then after the Civil War, like everything's hunky-dory and happy, but then we have the Civil Rights Movement, and like nobody like acknowledges like the 100 years in the middle of that. And then after the Civil Rights Movement, yay, happy, right? That's literally how history goes, at least for U.S. history, which I don't think I've shared this before, or maybe I have shared this before, but like I actually got my master's in U.S. history, because one, I love history, but like for me, it's always been understanding more deeply like the culture of each time period, and finding the positives of that. I know I've said that before, but like finding like what people enjoyed, like what were people reading, what were people doing, what kind of music were they listening to, what kind of foods were they eating. Like that's where I thrive, right? But this is beyond that. There's nothing wrong with how we learned history, in terms of we learned history in a very, I don't even know if you would call it like boxed way, right? Because no one wants to dwell on the negative. No one wants to dwell on the bad parts of history. But because people wanted to tell history kind of in a happy vacuum, you erased an entire group of people, and or you make them out to be the villains at all times. And it at first was just because, like, hey, we just need to have a textbook, right? And we want people to be happy and think like nationalism and all that stuff, which comes about in the 1800s. Because that's when, like, you really get a push for people to really focus on, like, being an American. You are an American. You are an American. But it's also just excessively whitewashed. And I probably should, like, put, like, a trigger warning or something at the front of this video or whatever, because like, this book it's gonna hurt feelings, and it's meant to hurt feelings, and it hurts feelings in a good way. And if you can't handle that, then, like, whatever. Like, don't read it, like, if you cannot handle your feelings being hurt about the way that you learned history, don't read this book. Because there's stuff in there that, like, is stuff that you may have learned about, or if you're a complete nerd, like, maybe you dove into it. Like, for example, he talks a lot about the varying slave revolts and different revolutions and stuff that happen in terms of slave revolutions. And we don't hear about those, right? We hear about the Haitian Revolution, and that's about it. We hear about the Nat Turner revolt, and that's about it. You don't really hear about anything between that. Some people may have heard of the Vesey revolt. Some people may have heard of the Louisiana revolt. But, like, by and large, those things aren't in textbooks. Like, I knew about the Louisiana revolt because I did my own research, but I wasn't taught about it. It was never mentioned in a class, including everything that I took, like, all the way through my master's. Like, it's just not mentioned. It's not one that people want to think about because it paints a picture that, unfortunately, white America doesn't necessarily want people to hear about. Like, it's just slavery happened. Yes, it was bad. Move on, right? But, like, let's talk about the fact that, one, there's an entire country that was completely made because slaves revolted. And two, there were other slave revolts. They were not as successful. And they were arguably more violent than I think what anybody has made out. And people are going to be like, well, they shouldn't have been violent. They should have just, kind of silently protested. Well, silent protest didn't get us anywhere. Like, respectfully or disrespectfully, however you want to take that. I really don't care. But, like, especially, like, the Louisiana revolt, like, that was beyond silent protest. Like, that, I forgot how many miles it was that they marched. They marched a good long way. I mean, like, real long. Definitely one of those where I'm like, if it was me, I would have stopped off somewhere. But he talks about, like, all of that in this book, and how that stuff gets glossed over in a lot of these books, or just flat not mentioned. So yeah, like I said, it's a 5 out of 5. It definitely is a book that is not necessarily written for written for white people. It's written for Black people, especially Black folks who haven't had the wherewithal to do their own research, or to understand, like, really what's going on in terms of, like, the stories of history, and, like, the quote unquote famous Black people mentioned. Absolutely, yes, but there's a bigger story beyond just Harriet Tubman or MLK or Rosa Parks. There's, all these other people that are involved in these varying movements at different times. And so all of those are mentioned. And then also from the author's perspective of just, like, how was his family involved in especially some of the later movements. And he is one of those people who is very lucky that his family does have such a rich tradition of sharing with their family members. And so, like, everybody in the family knows, the stuff. But not everyone gets that. And not everyone has that ability because it was designed that way. You know, a lot of Black folks cannot trace their ancestry beyond a certain point. And 9 times out of 10, that point kind of stops in the 1880s. There, you know, and if you get lucky to go beyond that, it's usually because you had to connect with somebody else who connected with somebody else, which is not bad work to do, but it's work that until recent years was not readily accessible or easily accessible for a lot of people. So, so I think him interspersing some of these stories, in throughout the book just really kind of adds to the richness of the book. Like I mean, honestly, I really cannot say enough positives about the book. You know, it was really great, written just like a textbook. It has like little quizzes at the end of each chapter. And I really liked that because, you know, it gives you time to kind of think and reflect, and some of them are just absolutely hilarious. Like the one at the end of the church chapter was like, do you go to a Black church or not? Which, like, I think it was like 40 some questions or something like that, and I obviously go to a Black church, so so I almost had, I think I had everything but 4, and it was only because, like, not because I haven't, like, heard it done, it's just I've never experienced it. But yeah, so there's a lot of, like, humor in it, which I really love. But it's definitely more, you know, kind of along the storytelling side. And it's very, you know, timeline, you know, start, like, you know, pre-colonial and then move all the way through. Which I also really appreciate, because I feel like sometimes when we teach American history, we're just like, start in the 1600s and go to the Civil War. And this goes before that, you know, because, like, Black people existed before 1619, in case anybody didn't know that, which is really nice, because that piece of just history in general just gets lost a lot of times, or people are just like, so King Henry VIII happened somewhere in there, and then Columbus somewhere in there, and I'm like, okay, but nobody cares about them. So yeah, but yeah, so really great book, highly recommend. Just really good if you just, like, want a nice little deep dive that's not super fiction or anything like it. You know, it doesn't read like a novel or anything like that, but it is also one that, like, it'll take you a moment to get through it. And the audiobook is great because it's read by the author, and so you can really hear a lot of his sarcasm and stuff, which is really nice. But yeah, like I said, really good book. Love. You know, I will probably reread and go back and highlight and everything in it, because it was so good, so good. So there you have it, Black AF History, by Michael Harriot, who, like, in the book, he goes Mikey, or Uncle Mike is how he refers to himself, which is great. And he also has recipes in there. Forgot that. There's recipes in the book. Or like pseudo recipes. It's a lot of like, add a dash, which is great. But, like, there's a lot of that stuff in there, like food breaks and stuff like that, which I love, because I'm a foodie. But yeah, that is our book review for this month. As always, please continue to send book recommendations. I cannot always promise that they will be expedited, or expedited, I should say, as some of them, it just kind of depends on what I'm in between reading. Yeah, I think that's about it. Book club, both book clubs are back. Kids book club is back, and my adult book club is back, so we'll probably see those books interspersed throughout the year as well. But outside of that, I look forward to seeing you in the next book review. Bye!